In this video, we're going to be diving deep into one of the most important aspects of you, your dark side. It's a side of yourself that you haven't accepted, which could be the key to your greatest success, if you let it. So if you've ever suffered from lack of self-confidence or felt like you were a nice guy, or maybe you just have negative thoughts and behavioral patterns that don't serve you, things that hold you back in business or cause conflict in relationships, but you can't really identify what they are or where they're coming from, this video is for you. I've put hours of time and energy into this video to make it as clear and concise as possible for you, and this is going to be some pretty dense stuff, but if you're here, I know that you're not looking for surface level information, so be sure to stick with me as we break this down. Not only are we going to go through some well-known examples so you can really understand this concept in depth in a short space of time, but I'm going to show you how you can identify these things in your daily life and then share a tool with you so you can go ahead and do this exercise at the end of this video so you can really start to master this process. Doing this work has helped me build self-confidence, take more risks, travel to more countries, have better relationships, and make more money. So I want to share this tool with you so you can do the same in your life. Think of it as breaking the invisible chains that you can feel that are holding you back. So most people think us humans are made up of three parts: mind, body, and spirit. But there's one missing part that not a lot of people understand or talk about. I believe that to have a free and successful life, that we need to be able to operate from a peak state. A peak state is where you feel on top of the world, everything is going well, you feel limitless. Think of a time in your life when something great happened. You went to the gym and you lifted heavier than you ever did before. You overcame your anxiety and you went to approach that woman. You got into flow state and then 4 hours of deep work and got closer and closer to the thing you're trying to accomplish. How you felt after or during is being in a peak performance state. And the beautiful thing is you make the best decisions when you are in this state. This is because your mind, your body, and your spirit is in alignment with what I call the highest version of yourself. Feeling like this allows any man to move mountains. It's like peak state living. And to get to this state consistently and be able to move effortlessly towards our goals, we need to integrate those darker parts of ourselves that are unconsciously holding us back, that we're going to break down for you in this video. So that fourth part that I mentioned is the shadow self. Think about it. You've probably been working on your mindset, investing in courses and programs, reading books, and doing all the self-improvement you could possibly do. You're even working out and you have a good physique and you are strong and capable. You've probably even felt glimpses of being on purpose or feeling like your best self. But something still feels off. You still get those really low moments, those negative thoughts that trigger a downward spiral. You may even feel stuck in your business like you're at a plateau. This is where the shadow comes in. So what is the shadow? The shadow is from Jungian psychology, which was created by a guy called Carl Jung. He was a Swiss psychiatrist born in 1975. His work had a massive influence on people like Abraham Maslow with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Sigmund Freud, and Jordan Peterson, who you may be more familiar with today. So let's start with a quote from Jung himself. Like plants, so men also grow. Some in the light, some in the shadows. There's many who need the shadows more than the light. Many of us ignore the darker parts of ourselves, and this is simply because we are trying to present the nicest, most socially acceptable version of ourselves to the world at all times, when in reality, we're not as good as we might think. We have animalistic tendencies like the desire for sex, the desire for power, and we have an aggressive side that has the ability to do harm to others, whether that is physically or verbally. We can ignore this side of ourselves all we want, but it does not go away. It gets stored deep in the subconscious mind, which is what Carl Jung called the shadow self. Every human has access to all these different parts of the psyche, and the idea is to integrate all the positive and the negative traits to become one, to become more authentic, more confident, more influential, and more attractive. And really the ability to protect ourselves, to protect others, to be independent, to be dangerous, but at the same time be enthusiastic, compassionate, and caring. So let's dive a little deeper. We all have a persona that we embody on a day-to-day basis, the image that we present to the world. So firstly, what is a persona? Persona is actually a Latin word that signifies a mask worn by an actor. Jung described it as kind of a mask, designed on one hand to make a definite impression on others, and on the other hand, conceal the true identity of oneself. So in short, the shadow is all the parts that your persona or yourself rejects or suppresses. So the development of your persona starts when you are a child. As you grow up and you go about your life, you start to learn what parts of your character are accepted by societal norms, family, and friends. Over time, we start to identify with the parts that are accepted, and that starts to form our identity. On the other hand, the character traits that are not accepted get suppressed into the shadow. We hide it from others, and we also hide it from ourselves. We disassociate from it and we say, that's not me. So we may like to believe that we're caring, kind, and compassionate people, but we also have the capacity to be narcissistic, selfish, and lazy. But as we grow older, admitting these things starts to cause conflict within ourselves. It creates almost like a split personality in all of us. For example, if your parents got divorced, you may have commitment or security issues that may need resolving. If you lived in a poor environment where you were led to believe that money is hard to make, you will believe that until you deal with it. These are the environments that shape our views of the world, which later shape our identity, and determines the characteristics that we will embody based on the things that were accepted or rejected. But like I said, the problem is that these suppressed traits don't just go away. They're being pushed down into a bin. They just get suppressed and stuck at the bottom. And then they start to operate in the background, in the unconscious, and they start to manifest in some strange ways. Just because you disassociate with it doesn't mean that it's not going to come out. It will always find a way to come out. And by the way, this is not just negative things, this is also positive things. It's not really about what's good or bad, it's about what was accepted and what was not accepted as a kid and as we grew older in these events. Because it's not just when you're a child, it's also could be recent events where something was accepted and something was not accepted, and that will then form into your identity. A powerful quote from Jung is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, you will direct your life and you will call it fate." To help you understand this even more, I want to show you some examples from movies. So the polarity in a shadow is commonly used in superhero movies to demonstrate the different sides of a persona, good and evil. The Avengers is a great example of this. Loki is the type of character that embodies the shadow of each one of the Avengers, especially Thor. In Star Wars, Darth Vader was the shadow of Luke Skywalker. In the James Bond movies, nearly every villain is a representation of the evil side of James Bond. One of the best examples I've seen where the shadow is at play is Fight Club. I'll try to be as discreet as possible if you haven't seen Fight Club yet. But also, if you haven't seen Fight Club, why? Tyler Durden is the shadow archetype of the narrator. He is what is suppressed, not what is evil. If you know, you know. The final example is so clear in most romantic comedies. If you see most romantic comedies, you'll see that there's always a beta male who's too nice or presents the nicest version of himself, is not good with women, and just embodies that character. Really what's at play here is he's presenting the nicest version of himself to the world in hopes that he will be accepted. He's trying to demonstrate that he is a good man. But I would argue that a good man is actually capable of danger, but then chooses not to, instead of this beta mentality, which is a cowardly persona. Being too nice or very agreeable is an example of suppressed aggression. The aggression is the shadow in this case. Most men who act in accordance with this suppressed version of themselves mistake being too nice for morality, when in reality they're actually just being cowardly because they don't have the capacity to actually do harm. And you might be thinking, well, isn't that a good thing? I would argue it's not, because deep down it shows weakness within the person, which can lead them to be untrustworthy, and it may result in someone like this acting on their own behalf in their own self-interest to protect themselves instead of the good of humanity in a given situation. And if you think about it, how can you rely on somebody who doesn't even have the capacity to stand up for themselves? On the other hand, a man that has the capacity to do harm because he has integrated the darker parts of himself has, for the lack of a better expression, a pair of balls. For a man to have the capacity to do harm but then to choose not to is actually moral. I see this as a strength. We'll discuss more about this a little bit later in the video. Carl Jung was also obsessed with phenomena, and his studies led him to ask the question as to why people became Auschwitz camp guards, because some guards even got enjoyment out of torturing other people. Now you may think that's crazy, how could people actually get enjoyment out of this? But who knows? Maybe you would too. The human psyche is dark, and maybe if it turned out that you did get pleasure from it, you would have trouble looking at yourself in the mirror because the shadow has now shown itself. This is an example of coming to the realization that maybe you're not who you thought you were, but it's actually a good thing because it's the revelation and realizing that every human being has the capacity to do evil, which from what I understand is a key part to the journey of enlightenment. That was an extreme example just to demonstrate the point. Now let's look at how the shadow can show up in your daily life so you can identify these things and integrate it. So some of the ways the shadow manifests itself in daily life is through our moods and our behaviors. This is because these suppressed character traits kind of bubble under the surface and they come out and cause conflict within our persona. To go even deeper, this can show up as self-sabotage or attracting the same negative relationships into our lives even though we've consciously said that this is not what we want. Any pattern of behavior that's sabotaging your progress is usually the shadow self appearing. It's like there's some need or some desire that we have not accepted about ourselves that is finding an outlet, and this is because we perceive it to be negative. It's kind of like a darker part of you just kind of jumping around and screaming saying, pay attention to me. This is also an opportunity for us to reframe how we see self-sabotage and use it as an opportunity to integrate our shadow. For example, if you're trying to focus on a task but every time you do it you're getting distracted, and then you keep prolonging the task and putting it off, you might start to develop some shame around the fact that you haven't done it yet. And the longer that goes on, the more shame and guilt builds up. And because you can't handle the shame of not being able to do it, or can't accept the fact that you actually may need help with this, or you can't do everything perfectly perfectly the way you thought you could, you're going to keep getting distracted every time this comes up as a way for you to rescue yourself from feeling those emotions. And in this case, the shadow is needing help or getting guidance. I think as entrepreneurs, it's very easy to develop the mindset that we have to be able to do everything ourselves, and this can actually show up in our shadow self. And in this case, this is something we need to be able to integrate so that we can truly get into focus and flow state. Self-sabotage is usually just a signal that something is there and needs to be integrated. So instead of seeing self-sabotage as something to feel guilty or bad about and blaming yourself for it, ask yourself the question, what is this trying to tell me? And we'll talk more about some tools you can do this towards the end of this video. Another way these things can manifest themselves is through relationships. A simple example is projecting how we feel about ourselves onto somebody else. In short, we criticize other people's faults and weaknesses that are actually present in ourselves. It can cause you to resent someone, but can also cause you to be very, very attracted to somebody as well, depending on the way that they express it and how they present it to the world. Usually because you unconsciously notice these things that are present within yourself as well. A key thing to note here is we can't perceive something in someone else unless it is present within ourselves first. This goes for both positive and negative traits. So if you really admire someone and you put someone on a pedestal, it's because they have traits that are actually present in you as well. So this works the same way as for positive traits as it does for negative traits. So I'm going to give an example in a relationship. If you are programmed to believe that you have to be nice to everyone and being selfish is bad, this will lead you to disassociate being selfish as part of your identity. So let's say in this case you're a nice guy and you've got in a relationship with a woman who is demanding and selfish. And as I mentioned, this is attracting the shadow version of you. And you end up pleasing the person to the extent of where you actually disregard your own needs and value. You agree with everything they do even though you don't really agree with it, and you end up starting to resent this person because you're ignoring the fact that your needs aren't being met and you're actually being undervalued. But you won't speak up about it because being selfish is considered bad, so that is repressed in your mind. This will lead you to stay in a toxic relationship where you're being undervalued, or that person will just eventually leave you because they see that you don't see your own value and they will lose attraction for you and end up leaving anyway. So that's how it can show up in relationships. You got to be careful with these things. And that brings me to my next point, which is balancing the poles and contrasexual tendencies. In every human, there is a masculine and there is a feminine. Normally, more men are more masculine than women because of testosterone and vice versa. But I believe that there is degrees to each depending on your upbringing, societal norms, and also the content that you consume, which is a conversation for another day. So the masculine energy is more focused on things like discipline, working hard, progress, all of those things. But the more feminine energy is focused more on compassion and caring. Of course, there's nuances, but that's the basics. So a man who is always in his masculine, but fails to have compassion or empathy towards himself or towards others because of his belief of if you show compassion, it's a sign of weakness, or if he was harassed or made fun of by friends or family when he expressed these traits as a child, this is going to lead to an obvious presence of a shadow. In this case, the feminine side of a man is the shadow. It's there, but it's not accepted, so therefore it's suppressed. Now, like I mentioned, there's a couple of ways this can show up. This can stem from being raised without a mother, without feminine energy around you, teaching you what compassion and caring is all about. And if the masculine figure that was there growing up didn't integrate his shadow either, this will more than likely trickle into you as well. And you'll notice that well-rounded, successful gentlemen are strong, powerful, and dangerous, but they also have an interesting aura of grace, charisma, kindness, and compassion. This is the balance of the masculine and the feminine. It's seen in a man who is well developed and has integrated both sides accordingly. Now, as a man, naturally, you're going to be more leaning towards being a masculine, but it's important to have these other traits as well, so you can become a true warrior that can protect, but also love as well. So let's jump into some tools. The first tool I'm going to share with you is the looking glass method. There's two ways of doing this. The first is taking note of your own resentments. What you want to do is you want to observe yourself as someone from the third person. For example, if you don't get what you want and you feel resentment or bitterness towards somebody else, take note of the fantasies that play out in your mind. These can get dark. You might even be surprised at the things that come up, and it may be a little bit difficult to even imagine yourself doing those things. These impulses or fantasies can cause friction within someone if they're not accepted. So people try to pretend these things don't exist to help convince themselves that they're not capable of something like that. But again, this can lead to people pleasing, being too nice, or being hyper agreeable. So you may be thinking, well, why would you want to integrate something like that? Well, it's because you're opening up and allowing and accepting a side of yourself that is forceful and aggressive, which I'm sure you can agree is useful and almost necessary when you're an entrepreneur, when you're in business, or when you're living a life where you need to have high performance. If you accept sometimes that you can be dangerous and then begin to express that through physical fighting, training, working out in a controlled environment, you begin to become more powerful, more confident, and more dangerous. And dangerous is usually associated with being negative, but I think the opposite. If you think about it, the most dangerous people don't have to be dangerous because they know that they're dangerous. It's usually the weaker people that try to overcompensate. Maybe they try to act tough just to convince themselves that they are stronger than they are, when in reality they're not. Hope that's making sense. The key is to really pay attention when this sort of resentment comes up, and then see yourself from the third person, forgetting about all the preconceptions or things that you think you know about yourself. Just be present with the feeling. Pay attention as if you don't know yourself, and just lead in with curiosity. Open up your mind to the fact that you may be somebody with inner demons, and they will show. Your resentment will also tell you if you have something to say about something. If you're angry or you're feeling depressed about something, you need to express it in some way so that you can remove it. Your soul depends on it, and I heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, but the actual faith of humanity depends on it. Because if you feel angry about something, it's for a reason. You have to express it because you could be actually picking up on some sort of evil that needs to be dealt with. Here's a simple example. Let's say you're 16 or 17 and a bully pushes you around in school. You feel resentment, but you were taught to be nice to others and to not act out and to not be aggressive. So you sit back and you don't do anything about it. And now other people are being pushed around because of your lack of standing up for yourself. You notice that emotion coming up and you did nothing about it. So now the faith of other people around you are also suffering. So it's your moral obligation to integrate these parts of yourself and allow yourself to express emotions in a controlled way that makes sense and is moral. So the second part of the looking glass method is noticing the positive and the negative traits in other people, building on the projection that we talked about, but also seeing things that you love about people and things that you get obsessed with is also the presence of a shadow. If you really feel the strong desire to change something in somebody, that's a part of yourself that you have not accepted. The more this inner talk comes up where it's like, there's no way that's a part of me, I would never associate it with that, I would never do that. Sorry to break it to you, but the more that comes up, the more likely it is that you have it. I'll give you a personal example. When I started my entrepreneurial journey, it was at home in my parents' house. Now previously I was someone who would procrastinate, I was someone who wouldn't follow through on what they said, and there was a lot of parts of me that I probably hadn't accepted. When I went home, my shadow became very present in my life, but I didn't understand it at the time. Sometimes I would see my family as lazy, and I would go around trying to get them motivated or trying to get them inspired, just trying to get them to do something the same way that I was doing something. Now, of course, at the time I saw this as a very positive thing, but I started to get very, very frustrated when I couldn't change them. When in reality, the reason for this was because I went off and I was on my high horse, I was changing my life, I was doing everything differently to the way I used to. And the resentment inside of me was strong because I couldn't accept the fact that I used to be lazy. And there's times where I am still lazy. And it was all of these things that was coming up, and I was doing everything I possibly could to change it in other people. A clear shadow was present. Now, like I mentioned, when it comes to the positive, the same things applies. If there's anybody out there who you idolize or someone who you put on a pedestal, there's a part of you that feels deeply connected to this person, and you see a version of yourself in them, and it's screaming inside of you saying, pay attention to me, because you can see that those positive traits that you see in other people is something that you have not allowed yourself to experience. So if you see a person on stage or on YouTube and you start to romanticize their life, it may be because you haven't allowed yourself to be what they are. You have suppressed that version of yourself, but deep down, you know that is possible for you too. And you just want to experience it, which is why you put them on a pedestal and why you idolize these people, when really they're no different than you are. But the thing is, if you don't allow yourself to actually experience that, and you don't allow yourself to become whole, you will do everything you can to seek that in other people so that you can experience it in some way. You'll try to experience it by clinging to other people who have the traits that you would love to embody, or dedicating your life to serving them or being around them, because you believe that it's only present in somebody else, instead of knowing that you already have it all inside of you and you just haven't allowed yourself to express it. So these are parts that we also want to integrate. Let's bring this into a journal exercise to really bring this full circle. So doing shadow work is addressing these darker parts of ourselves and integrating them into our lives so that we can become whole, leading us to feel more confident, more authentic, more attractive to other people, allowing us to lead others, allowing us to live a full life, allowing us to experience life to its fullest. Now, by now, I hope I did a good job of explaining everything in detail to you so you can really understand it. So we've talked about a couple of different reframes and questions that you can ask, but let's go a little bit deeper into some journaling tools that you can use to integrate this into your life. Let's kick off this 4-step journaling process with a quote from Carl Jung. "Only the man who goes through the darkness can hope to make any further progress." So this is the 4-step conscious questioning journaling technique, which is inspired by Ken Wilbert's 3-2-1 shadow technique. So you can speak this out loud and just ask yourself the questions, but I would recommend to get a journal, get a piece of paper, and just write some stuff down as we go through these 4 steps. First thing you want to do is get very clear on what it is that you actually want to work with. We don't want to tackle everything in one go. We want to take it piece by piece and solve things as we go. A good place to start is asking yourself, what am I embarrassed about? Is there some desire or something in your life where you're embarrassed about feeling that way about something, or when something comes up, you feel like a strong negative emotion or a strong association with something? Think about this for a little bit. The next way you could look at it is, what is something that keeps coming up in my life that I just have to keep pushing away? Maybe it's a pain of a past failure or a a past relationship, or maybe it's a feeling of unworthiness around a certain goal that you have. Take some time to reflect if you need to. You don't have to figure this all out in one sitting. This may take some time, especially if this is your first time doing this. So step 2 is having a conversation with this version of yourself that is experiencing this negative emotion, this resentment, whatever the case is. Now this can get a little spiritual, a little up in the clouds for some of you, especially if you're not familiar with this type of work, but just I invite you to keep an open mind with these things. The first thing to note with this is that everything exists in the present moment. Any past feelings that you've had, or any future feelings that you desire, or anything that happens in between that, can only exist in the present, right? If you think about it, when you are stuck in the past, you are reliving a present moment. And when you were in the past, you were also in a present moment. When you are thinking about your future, right? It's not that it's some magical future that's, completely different. You're just going to be in the present, but the present is in the future, but you're going to be living it in the present. Hopefully that's making sense. So what we want to do is we want to invite this version of ourselves who is suffering from this resentment, this emotion, these things that are coming up, and have a conversation, dialogue with it. I'll give you a funny example from myself. When I was doing some of this work to heal some resentment that I had towards different things in my life when I was a teenager, I would go back and I would actually visualize the past version of myself sitting there beside me, right? He was a teenager, 15, 16, when I had like big diamond earrings. I had a massive eyebrow piercing. I had my tongue pierced. I had my hair gelled down. I was just a typical teenage kid that just didn't want to talk to anyone. He was just super angry at the world. And I would picture him sitting there right in front of me, and I would just open up a dialogue with him. So that brings me to step 3, which is start talking to it. And I would ask him questions like, what do you want? What is the positive intent here? What is keeping you stuck in this emotion? Why are you hurt? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell me? The goal is to really realize that you are a completely different version of yourself today than you were when this thing that you're working with happened. Sometimes we forget that we're always evolving and that we've actually changed a great amount, and instead we live in the past thinking that we're the same person. You today is a completely different version of yourself a couple of years ago. Think about a time where you hurt your knee. Maybe you were a kid, you fell off a bike and you opened up your knee, you were all bleeding. Think about a couple of weeks later where your body actually regenerated the skin, it was all healed, and you were just back to normal. Your body regenerates itself. And it's actually scientifically proven that our body regenerates completely every 7 years, which means that physiologically, you are actually a new human being every 7 years. So it's time to update the mental software that actually comes with that. Stop living with these past resentments or past emotions and heal them and move on to create that new identity that we want to create. So when it comes to having this past conversation with this past version of yourself, don't pass judgment, don't go explaining things logically. You want to make yourself feel comfortable, not judge, and just simply ask, what's going on? It's incredible the answers that you get if you spend time with this and really focus. Turn off all distractions when you're doing this. An easy tip that you can do is just to keep asking why. If you're doing this and you're writing down and you get this thing that comes up, write down why. Like, why do you feel this way? Why do you think that? Why do you believe that to be true? What is it that you're trying to tell me? Why are you trying to tell me that? Keep asking these questions to really get to the root until you have that breakthrough that you're looking for. So step 4 is to integrate it. Now this might get a little dense, but stick with me. Like I mentioned, with that past version of myself that I was trying to help, I would go back and I would visualize him sitting there, another version of me, and just open up a dialogue. When I'm doing this, I'm kind of jumping through different realities. So I want to expand your mind a little bit when it comes to these things. As I mentioned, we're led to believe that time is linear. You're here, and then you go here in the future, and back here is the past. But like I said, everything is existing here in the now. So to really integrate it, we have to take what we just learned, realize that everything is in the present moment, go back and speak to that past version of ourselves, bring it into the present, and reframe the whole experience. It's extremely powerful. I've done it many times. And the beauty about this process, you can do this at home. You can do it with a journal. You can do it just sitting in your room, calming your mind, removing all distractions, and just spending some time with yourself. I will say that don't expect miracles to happen when you try this for the very first time. If you're new to meditation, if you're new to visualization, then this will be a lot to take on. But if you're more experienced with those things, just give it a couple of times. Allow yourself time. Bring things up and get better at it. Use it as like a skill building exercise where you just get used to doing this over time. Give yourself some time. The fact that you started and that you're taking action is enough right now. And also realize that this video was packed full of different scenarios, and it's easy to sit there and feel overwhelmed with the amount of information that you just got. You don't want to overanalyze the things that you need to work on, because in reality, you don't need to work on every single thing right now. Take a deep breath. Don't overwhelm yourself. You don't need to be doing shadow work every single day to be able to progress in life. It's simply a tool that you can use when you notice these things coming up and you want to take your personal development to the next level and really start taking action. Like I said, it's not going to make or break your whole life. But if you're not where you want to be and you feel like you're not really in control of your thoughts, your behaviors or emotions, and maybe even the direction of your life or where your business is going, then I invite you to use this video as a tool. It's here to help you become more of what you already are: confident, successful, wealthy, free, and worthy. In other words, limitless. But I will say, doing this work is powerful. You're breaking the chains that are holding you back, allowing you to move up new levels of consciousness. Not everybody is willing to do it, but the ones who do really have an unfair advantage compared to everybody else. Everybody has access to the same strategies, the same tactics, the same way of doing things. But for the few who are willing to go deep within themselves and truly tap into that element of mastery are the ones who will truly succeed in life. Back in August, I was at a 7-figure mastermind where I chatted to a lot of very interesting, inspiring entrepreneurs. A lot of them were coaches and consultants, and this was a common theme between all of them. A lot of them had done breathwork sessions, therapy, different coaches that they worked with, all related to mindset. And they said the majority of their success had come from those sessions that they did, that work that they did internally rather than externally. And that's where the true progress was really made. And that's where, you can tap into things like growing a business that you love, feeling more fulfilled, and overall just being a well-rounded human being. But of course, it happens one step at a time, but doing this work will help you go from darkness into light. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of this video. Congratulate yourself for actually watching this training in full. Now you have a deep understanding of the shadow self and how you can integrate it into your life using the tools that we talked about. If you want to join a free community, check out the links in the description where you can be surrounded by people who are doing this work along with you, get some free resources, free trainings that go deeper on some of these topics and really help you become the best, most confident, most successful version of yourself by integrating these things into your life. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.